Hi everyone. This week our lecture is scheduled as senses, and I'm not really going to talk about all the senses because it would take me more than a week's material. I'm just going to talk about eyes. And one of the reasons I like to talk about eyes a lot is we all have we're so absolutely completely dependent on our eyes, and there's a lot of things that we can do to correct our eyes, or a lot of diseases that we hear about related to the eyes. And so I think it's something that you'll be able to relate to and will be meaningful. We're going to do, with eye, we're pretty much going to do the parts. So get a diagram. I'm going to come back to this diagram a lot. It's the same one that's in your textbook. I also have a diagram of the eye in the lab handout. So make sure you can identify where the parts are on a diagram of the eye, and then go down the names of the parts and make sure you know what their functions are. And then to kind of top it off, we're going to talk about a lot of diseases related to the eye, or a lot of conditions related to, abnormal eye function. And if you understand what is normal and what part does that, it's pretty easy then to make the next step as to figuring out, oh, if the lens doesn't work correctly, what would happen to the vision? So that's where we're going. We're going to come back to this picture a lot. So here we are. Lots of vocabulary. So first thing we're going to talk about is the sclera. And the sclera is just the white part of the eye. And so if we look at a picture like that, we can see the white part of the eye. But if we look at this cross section, what would we call this? We would call this a sagittal section, separating the right and left side of the eye. The sclera actually goes around the whole back side of the eye. So it's this outer layer is the sclera. And what you know it as the white of your eye. The sclera is really tough. Most of us do not ever poke anything through our eye. Even if you touch your eye, or you accidentally poke something into it, it doesn't usually rupture. And the main reason is that sclera is so tough. It's very fibrous. There's a lot of protein in there, a lot of protein fibers, a lot of collagen, and it gives that outer part of the eye a lot of protection. So the sclera is the very protective outer white layer of the eye. Now, if you go around, we're on the sclera, but you go around to the front of the eye, where we can see the colored part of the eye, the sclera no longer exists. We have something on the outside called the cornea. Now, when we look at the eye head on like this, you don't really see the cornea because you're looking through it. The cornea is clear. It's also made of a special protein layer. If we look at this sagittal section, you can see the cornea is continuous with the sclera. There's the sclera, and then there's the cornea. And obviously, if we had sclera in front of our eye, we wouldn't be able to see through it. So the cornea is nice and clear in a normal eye, so light can pass through it. The cornea, and you can see here too how it kind of bulges off the surface of the eye. The cornea is, what was I going to tell you about the cornea? Oh, it's very sensitive. You'll notice you can kind of almost touch your sclera, and it's a lot less comfortable to touch your cornea. You probably shouldn't be touching either, because we don't want to introduce bacteria or little scratches or anything to our eyes. But the cornea has a particularly large amount of sensory receptors. So we're very sensitive to touching our eyes in general, but our cornea in particular. And that is also protective of the eye, because we tend to be very protective of our eyes because of that sensitivity. So the cornea is the clear surface on the clear structure on the surface of the eye. And what happens with the cornea is light. Everything we're looking at is actually reflected light off of an object. And so the cornea bends that light into the eyeball and starts the process of getting light into our eyeball. So the cornea is that clear layer, bends the light to get it into our eyeball. The next structure I want to talk about is something called the choroid. So your book actually mentions that there's 3 layers in the eyeball. And so the first layer would be that outer sclera. The second, if we get a little bit deeper, in our picture here, it's kind of a pinkish layer, is something we call the choroid. So, and again, you can see that the choroid doesn't extend to the front of the eye, but makes up most of, is this second layer in most of the eyeball. So, where's it labeling it? Oh, that says cornea. Here's the choroid, this kind of pinkish layer. And the main function of the choroid is to reduce glare. And so if you cut open an eyeball, dumped out, there is kind of jelly stuff in there, dump that out. The inside of the eyeball looks kind of black like that. And that black is from melanin, the same pigment that would color skin dark or freckles dark. Melanin's the same compound that makes, if you have dark hair, it's what makes hair dark. So the inside of the eyeball, that choroid layer, actually is very dark. And what it does is it reduces glare. We've all seen that like at night and it's raining and there's car lights and it just, you see that glare in the light and it's really hard to focus on things to see well. So if we didn't have this dark choroid layer inside of our eye, everything would always look like a glare like that. In fact, people that genetically lack melanin, somebody who you would call albino, meaning you don't make any melanin, their hair's white, their eyes are very light colored, and they don't have melanin inside their eyeballs, in their choroid layer. And so they can see this glaring light even in normal room light. So the choroid, even in just our regular intensity of light in a regular classroom, for example, would look like a lot of glare without the choroid. Sometimes you see people that have albinism, that are albinos, wear sunglasses inside, and that's the reason, to reduce the amount of glare. Okay, so we've looked at the eyes, we've looked at the sclera, we went a little bit deeper and talked about the choroid. We see the cornea on the outside. The other thing I want you to notice is deep to that cornea is the part of the eye that we would say is the colored part of our eye, and that's called the iris. And so the iris can be different colors. It's genetically determined what color our iris will be. And the iris is actually a muscle. And we're all familiar with the fact that there's a little dark circle in the middle of the iris, and that's called the pupil. You notice that the pupil changes size depending on whether you're in bright light or dim light. So the idea is that you need a certain amount of light to be able to see, to stimulate your photoreceptors in your eyes. So the iris is a muscle, and as it contracts and relaxes, it changes the shape, that changes the size of the pupil. The pupil is simply a hole. It's not a black thing. It's just a hole. If you took a box and you poked it, a solid box, and you poked a hole in it and you looked through that hole, it would look dark because the light can't get in. And that's why the inside of our eye looks dark, because it's just like looking into an empty box. So the pupil's just a hole. And I've seen this in live human biology labs where we're dissecting eyeballs. Sometimes we dissect sheep eyeballs, and every once in a while somebody's looking for a little black ball to fall out. Like, I can't find the pupil. But the pupil's not a little black ball. It's actually just a hole. It's a space. So the iris is the muscle that controls the size of the pupil, which is going to control how much light goes in the eye. So you're probably familiar with, in bright light, your pupil gets smaller. In dim light, your pupil will be larger. So if we look at this picture again, here we have, so the light comes through, it gets bent into the eye through the cornea, and then there's part of the iris. The iris is a muscle, and then right here is that hole, the pupil. And so the light's going to pass through the pupil. Now I skipped something there on the process. There's just a little space here between the cornea and the iris. And your book says, oh, it's that space is called anterior compartment. You can use that word or not. I'm not going to quiz you on that word, but it makes sense. It's the front of the eye. It's a compartment. It would be a space. a space in front of the eye. And in that space between the cornea and the iris is something called aqueous humor. Now, aqueous means watery, and humor is kind of an old-fashioned word for a liquid. So it's saying in this space in front of the iris or behind the cornea, in this space right here, is a watery liquid. It's called aqueous humor. And we're going to talk about this when we talk about diseases, because there's a disease related to abnormal aqueous humor. But it's kind of interesting because when you think about it, like the cornea and the lens and the iris, all these parts here, just like any living tissue, they need nutrients and they generate wastes. And you probably remember every other part of our body somehow has a fluid that delivers nutrients and takes away wastes. And most of the time that's blood. So blood is going to deliver oxygen and nutrients and take away waste. But if we had blood in the front of our eye, we wouldn't be able to see anything but red. So instead, a fraction of the blood the red blood cells are filtered out, all the blood cells are filtered out, and we end up with this stuff called aqueous humor. And the aqueous humor is made and it circulates through the front of the eye, and then it's reabsorbed back into the blood. The aqueous humor is made from the blood cells are removed, now it's a clear fluid, it circulates around the front of the eye, it delivers oxygen, it delivers other nutrients, it takes away CO2, and then it's absorbed back in the blood. And that should sound a little bit familiar. You might remember, think of a part, we had another fluid in a previous lecture that was made from the blood, circulated around, and got reabsorbed back to the blood. Do you remember the cerebrospinal fluid? Did the same thing. So the aqueous humor is similar to cerebrospinal fluid, and it's gonna circulate in the front of the eye and be reabsorbed. The other structure I wanted to show you was the lens. So we've got this, the light's going to come through the cornea, pass through the aqueous humor, pass through the pupil, and then you're going to hit this big structure that's got layers of protein, kind of like an onion, and it's called the lens. And the lens is surprisingly stiff. It's like it's kind of like a little jelly bean. And what the lens does is it actually moves a little bit and focuses the light. So whatever you're looking at is what you're focusing on. And how do you focus? Well, the lens, you can see there's little muscles attached here, and it's going to change the shape of the lens slightly to focus the image that you're looking at. Okay, the lens focuses the image you're looking at, so it moves slightly. And then the light that's been focused is going to pass through the inside of the eyeball. And inside of this eyeball is something called vitreous humor. So we said humor is a fluid. Vitreous means jelly-like. So believe it or not, inside the eyeball, it really is like jelly. And that's called the vitreous humor. And you can imagine that this jelly-like substance fills the inside of the eyeball and gives the eyeball its shape. We're also going to talk about the retina, the inside layer that the vitreous humor pushes against the choroid. So it holds the retina in place, and it gives the eyeball its shape. Now we said that aqueous humor circulates in the front of the eyeball, and it's always changing. We're always getting fresh aqueous humor and reabsorbing the old stuff. But the vitreous humor, the jelly-like part in the eyeball, never changes. And the one place you might be familiar with something to do with your vitreous humor, if you ever got a floater, every once in a while you might see like a little black spot, like a little speck in your vision. And sometimes a little bit of that vitreous humor kind of changes. It happens as we get older. It changes a little bit. It might get a little watery and have a little spot of watery vitreous humor, and it can create like a little shadow in our vision. And that's called, that would be a floater. And a lot of times those floaters, you'll notice it for a while, and then sometimes after a while it just goes away. After maybe, I don't know, a year or something, or shorter than that. And sometimes the floaters just kind of settle down to the bottom and you don't see it anymore. But it's just that has to do with changes in your vitreous humor, which is common as we get older. So the aqueous humor is the watery fluid in the front of the eye. The lens, and that's going to nourish the structures in the front of the eye. The lens is involved in focusing light. It's attached to little muscles that change the shape a little bit to help us focus. And the vitreous humor, the jelly inside the eyeball, gives the eyeball its shape and holds the retina against the choroid. And I'm going to stop right there and start the next video at retina.